everyone, and welcome to another edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. We have a great show for you today. It is May 21st, a Tuesday. I'm your host, Tommy Brzee, as always, and we have a great show. We're going to start talking a little bit about some scheduling conflicts going on between the college football playoff and the NFL. As we all know, we're getting more and more games during the month of December, and the NFL is going to have to adjust to that, and hopefully that college football will hold their ground on Saturdays, but we'll get into all that and break down my thoughts on that. Then we'll get into one of the big faces in college football going forward, in my mind, in Ramogi Huma. Ramogi Huma is a very, very talented activist for athlete rights and especially student athlete rights in college sports. So want to break down him and kind of the role he will play in the future of college football and college sports overall. Then we'll get into Oklahoma and if they are ready for the SEC challenge that is ahead. A lot of talk around them in Texas not being able to handle the physicality and the scheduling and all of things like that. So I want to break down where I think Oklahoma stands and all of that. Then we'll get into a transfer portal update before we wrap up with a Top 10 Tuesday. And today we're talking about the College Football 25 game, and I'm giving you my 10 players that I am most excited to play with in that game. So we'll break that down at the very end, so definitely stay tuned for that. But before we jump in, I do want to remind you all, we get tons of questions and comments throughout the show, and the best way for you all to get your question on the screen or comment on the screen, we can have fun back and forth here, is to use the tip and donation link at the bottom of your screen, gsmcpodcast.net. It's a huge help not only to us here at the network, but to you all. You get to have a fun kind of interactive experience here, and we get to kind of learn a little bit about each other, which is always a good time. Again, that's gsmcpodcast.net. But let's jump right in, and let's talk about this college football playoff against the NFL scheduling that has been going on. As we all know, the expanded playoff is here, and the scheduling for it is going to be a little bit different. We usually have this big old gap in December where there are bowl games going on, but there's no playoff games until maybe the 30th to the 1st, whenever that kind of falls, depending on the year. That is no longer, right? You have to get through a number of rounds at this point, and they got to start pretty soon. So the way it's going to start this year is a week after the Army-Navy game, which is on December 14th. So December 21st, things will really get going. Actually, on December 20th is when the first game will be. That Friday night is when the first on-campus first-round game, the ones that I think all of us are very, very excited about going into this 12-team playoff, that's when those will happen. So it's going to be, the 20th will be one game, and then the 21st you'll have a game from 12, 3:37. So the normal time slots that we usually have in college football. The issue with that is the NFL is not necessarily moving out of the way because, as we've seen the last couple of years, the NFL has started to schedule just a couple of games here and there on a Saturday once college football is over because there's less to compete with, right? And there's more time for them to kind of get a little bit more of the spotlight. And so they've started to schedule more and more games on those days. Now, December 21st is the one we're going to focus on because that's the start of the playoff and the one that the NFL uses at least to start kind of that, using the Saturdays. That's when all of that kind of really kicks off. And they have two games on that day that are going to be a little bit tough to compete with. I won't lie to you. At 1 p.m., the Texans are going to face off against the Chiefs. As we all know, C.J. Stroud took the world by storm last year and was one of the best stories in the entire NFL. So he's going to be fascinating to watch this upcoming year. The Chiefs are always appointment television. I think we all understand that at this point. And then at 4:30 you have Baltimore against Pittsburgh, and that is one of the biggest rivalries in all of the sport. That is something that you're going to be hard-pressed to find someone in Baltimore or Pittsburgh that is not fully locked into that game, among others. There's definitely going to be a lot of people that choose NFL over the college football playoff, but that being said, they're going to have to rival some pretty good college football games. We know that the playoff is going to add more teams to it, but the matchups are going to be just awesome. So we went through this probably about 2 weeks ago at this point, but Dennis Dodd, after the spring ended over at CBS, he's put out kind of his projections for the 12-team playoff and what first-round matchups we would hypothetically get. All of them were awesome, if you were to ask me. I think you start with Alabama against Notre Dame in Tuscaloosa. That would just be off the charts incredible. You would have Texas against Penn State in Austin. You would have other ones. I think you'd have Boise State in Eugene to play Oregon. Some other ones in there. So there are some really, really good games. And the good news about this is only 2 of the 4 games that are on that weekend will be affected. So you can kind of decide which way you want to play this, right? You can decide maybe we want to put Alabama and Notre Dame as the night game on the Saturday and let Texas and Penn State be the night game on the Friday. So those are the 2 that are not affected by the NFL, while putting the other 2 in those NFL slots. That being said, it can all change depending on what those matchups are and where they are and kind of how everything shakes out. But it is an interesting conversation to be had, and it's something that I think a lot of college football fans are slightly worried about. I think we've all seen over the past couple of years where college football will get in on the conversation and then the NFL will kind of override them, and it's really hard to fight the NFL, as we all know, probably the most powerful entity in definitely in football, one of the most powerful in all of sports. So it's going to be hard to fight against. But the reality is Saturdays belong to college football, and that should not change. That cannot change in my mind. I think this is something, it's bad enough that we already play the championship on a Monday, and that's something that has to change. I promise you, if there's some alternate universe where I turn out to be the college football commissioner in my future, that's day one. There is no question about that. That game should be on a Saturday, but every game should be on a Saturday. Saturday is college football, and I understand you have to move one to a Friday so you can have those standalone games on Saturday, but for the majority, at the very least, they have to be on a Saturday because that is the day that all of us wake up knowing that college football is on. I think all of us, me especially, have a running routine throughout fall. It's pretty much Thursday through Monday. It is some form of football that I'm watching, and then Wednesday and Thursday, or Tuesday and Wednesday, excuse me, I'm just waiting until football is happening the next day. So all of this, my entire life revolves around football in the fall, and on Saturdays, it's all college football. And then on Sundays, I'm fully locked in on NFL, no problems there. But once you started having them overlap, you got a little bit of an issue. And now, for me, it's not that big of a problem. I'll be totally honest with you. All this means to me is I pull out another TV, get 2 going, and that's the end of the conversation. I will say the volume will be on the college football playoff. There's no 2 ways about that. But to me, it just sounds like more football, and I'm not one to turn my nose up at that by any means. So I think this is going to be really interesting to watch. I think the real hope is obviously that these playoff games don't get buried by the NFL the way that so many other things do. I mean, in 2023, 93 of the 100 most watched television programs were NFL broadcasts. So it gives you an idea of where they sit in the echelon of not only sports, but just television overall. They are the dominant force. NFL is king, as you've heard, I'm sure, a time or two. It's one of those things that the top 56 most watched television programs in 2023 were NFL games. So it's hard to fight against. There's no 2 ways about that. Ohio State and Michigan was 57th, so that is, right in that realm. But when you talk about how far behind they are the massive NFL games that are ahead of them, it makes it a little bit tough. And you really hope that this is not something that carries over into this new kind of situation we find ourselves in, where college football playoff games are fighting with deep regular season NFL games, because you want to watch both of them. You want them to both, get their proper shine, but also the college football playoff is just going to have to fight against this. I don't see a world where, you don't lose some type of viewership. I don't see a world where you don't lose some type of revenue from this. But the reality is, a little bit of money is, I'm more than happy to lose that, especially because it doesn't affect me. I don't know why anyone would be remotely upset about this if it doesn't affect your pockets, but that's beside the point. I think overall, when we talk about this, Saturdays are non-negotiable, especially for some of the biggest games in the on the calendar, especially for those games in particular. That has to be non-negotiable because Saturdays are college football. I think we all want Saturdays to stay the focal point of the sport. I talked about the Monday title game. That's a nightmare that hopefully will be fixed at some point soon. But the reality is, you're going to have to fight against one of the most powerful entities in sports. And that's just kind of the way of things. That's where you find yourself right now with the expanded college football playoff and doing it, not necessarily in lockstep with the NFL. Apparently they reached out to the NFL. The NFL was not willing necessarily to budge from those 2 spots. So they just decided it was better to move forward, butting heads with them and try to figure out a way and see what it looks like this upcoming year. I'm a little bit worried with the current people that are making these big time decisions for the college football playoff that if it doesn't go great this year, they could start to pull away from Saturday. That cannot happen. If anything in the sport, of all the things that are broken about this sport, Saturday is not one of them. There's no two ways about it. Saturday are for college football. I'm more than happy to watch the NFL games off in the corner with no sound. There's no problem with that. But I'm watching college football on Saturdays. If you take those games away from me on Saturdays, you're going to have a big problem on your hands. And I'm going to be totally honest. I will be a part of that problem for the NCAA. I just cannot imagine a world where you're playing those games, especially those games that are on campus, that will have those atmospheres, that are new to this game. If you're not playing them on the biggest day of the week for your sport, you're losing the plot entirely. So I get you're fighting the NFL. I get that you're probably going to lose some viewership here. I get you're going to lose some money. It is well worth it to keep this sport where it should be on a Saturday. And then we'll get to the title game as we get there. That's something that we can fight further on. But the reality is right now, hopefully that this is something that just becomes normal world where we have those college football playoff games, but we also have some NFL games to watch from time to time or check in on when the other games are on commercials. So I'm not opposed to this. It just sounds like more football to me. I am slightly opposed to the people that could be making the decision of whether this stays the case in the future, but at the end of the day, hopefully we stay put and college football stays on Saturdays, especially for these games, because it's absolutely essential to what the college football playoff is going to be and what college football needs to be going forward. So it's a little bit of a battle. It'll be interesting to see kind of what those numbers look like once all of this kind of comes to fruition, and if the NFL really does bury the college football playoff, if the college football playoff takes a big chunk out of the NFL and maybe they decide to go back all the way into Sunday. So who knows what's going to happen with this. Personally, I hope for the latter rather than the former. I hope the NFL decides to rethink, but as of right now, you have it on a Saturday. It's just got to stay that way. That's for sure. But that'll do it for this segment. When we come back, we're going to talk about Ramogi Huma, a very, very talented student athlete activist that has kind of taken the world by storm a little bit the last little bit and has been a big time name in college football. So I want to break down first of all who he is and also the big time part he could play in the future of our sport and every college sport. So stick with us and we will be right back with that.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows where 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about the scheduling conflict that will be arising this upcoming year around the college football playoff in the NFL later on in the season, but they got to stay put on Saturdays for the college football playoff. That's what I'll say on that. But let's get into Ramogi Huma and let's talk about this guy because he's a name I'm sure you don't necessarily know as of right now, but you will in the future. I have very little doubt about that. I've talked about this a lot on this show where college football needs a voice, whether that's, a entirely new governing body with someone up at top being the voice, or that's just someone from the outside that is permeating through the fans and actually getting a message across that needs to be got across. And Ramogi Huma has been trying to do that for quite some time. Dennis Dodd did a great piece on him over at CBS. If you want to see the full length, you can go over there. But just to give you a gist of who he is and kind of the role that he can play in the future of college football and college sports overall, Huma was a linebacker at UCLA while in college, was in the kind of college football world, so fully understands what this world looks like. And there was a moment during his college career that kind of everything sort of clicked for him in terms of what the world of college sports actually looked like, and not only that, but what he wanted to do about it. So kind of want to break down this quote for you guys real quick here. And it says, "They called them voluntary workouts, but they clearly weren't voluntary. When we were told that the NCAA had a rule, should we be injured during summer workouts, UCLA was prohibited from paying for our medical expenses. That was a big deal for me." So that gives you an idea of kind of where all this began. There was obviously a policy at UCLA where when you show up to quote-unquote voluntary workouts, which I think all of us know they are not voluntary, definitely show up to those workouts. But at the end of the day, if you are, put in that position to go to voluntary workouts, but UCLA is also not allowed to pay for your medical expenses should something happen, there's a problem there. And Huma very obviously noticed that and has since then pretty much devoted his life to being a activist for student athletes and making sure that student athletes are put in as great of a position as possible to succeed not only on and off the field. So when you talk about Huma, he is far above most of the people in college sports when you talk about especially activism around college sports. He is the director or the executive director of the National College Players Association, so something we've talked about a lot. He is a name that is out there as one of the leaders for a possible players union, players association going forward in college football in particular, but also maybe just college sports overall, depending on what kind of role that takes and what kind of what that looks like, I suppose, at the end of the day. So I think one of the most impressive things about him is he's a constant, and I think we've all talked about college football in particular, but college sports overall, there's very little that are constants. There's a ton of changing. We've had tons of different NCAA directors since he's been in the game. We've had tons of different, presidents, and we've had power conferences employ 15 different commissioners since he's been in the game 23 years ago. And this guy has done the same thing. He's been a part of that nonprofit players association since 2001 and has only been building that out more and more. So it's remarkable. The fact that, when you look at college sports today, everyone says you got to adapt, right? Everyone says you got to change the way you're messaging. Everyone says you got to change the way that you go about things. The reality is, as long as you start on the right side of things, you ain't got no problem. And the reality is for Huma, he absolutely did. He started on the side of these players need a little bit more power. They need a little bit more ability to kind of flex their muscles in these conversations, or at least be in these conversations about the future of their sport. So he's been someone that has been big time on, at the forefront of this sport in terms of activism, and people have approached him of being that voice for college football, being that leader, whatever that may look like for the future of college football. Sounds like he's not super interested in that position as of right now. It sounds like he is fully focused on being an activist, not necessarily interested in getting in on the machine, more interested in trying to prod at it from afar, which I totally understand that. But I think one of the big things that we've learned in college sports is desperation is real, especially right now, and for order more than anything else. And I think there's a reality where right now he's not super inclined, but the more and more people are like, we really need someone like you in the door, I think the more and more he starts to think about it. And it's not necessarily to say that he is close to making that decision or is going to make that decision at all, but just to say there are a lot of people that want him to be in a bigger position of power, me included. The more I've learned about this guy, it's been more and more remarkable hearing about him, and not only the person that he was during his college days, but the person he's become and kind of the way he goes about business. I mean, excuse me, this is a guy that, you know, isn't necessarily the most like well-off individual in the world. Dennis Dodd had a very interesting quote or interesting article or paragraph in here, excuse me, talking about just who he is and giving you an idea. As of 2019, obviously this can change a little bit, but he was making around $83,000 a year. Not to pocket watch this guy by any means, but that's just the reality of the situation. And during that time, he was putting millions of dollars in the pockets of athletes, in the pockets of everyone around him, but not himself. And it gives you an idea of the person that he is, the person that he has kind of become, and it's what we need. I've looked around college football a lot, especially over the last 2 months doing this show and being as plugged in as I've been. You start to get a real perspective on just how, I don't want to say poorly, but just how dysfunctionally, I suppose, the whole system is run. It feels like everyone is out to boost up their position, boost up their, bank account, to be fair, boost up a couple of things that have very little to do with the health of college football and have very little to do with the health of college sports and college athletes, which at the end of the day, that's where your money comes from. And having people like Ramogi Huma, having people like Nick Saban, having people like Jay Wright, having all of these individuals around the sport that not only know the sport, not only were involved in the sport in the past, but care about these kids. And you can see it because the proof is in the pudding. I've watched, particularly Jay Wright and Nick Saban, two coaching legends in their respective sports. I've watched them throughout their career, and it's remarkable to see the way that some of their former players, former coaches, former staffers, whatever it looks like, how they respond to them is just remarkable. And it gives you an idea of how much that they connect with those people. Huma's no different. I realize I just put Homa in the lower third. I very much apologize for that. That was unintentional. But he's one of those people, and you need just as many of those people in that room as possible. I know that you're not going to offset the TV execs. You're not going to offset the lawyers and the people that are not involved in the sport that like to make decisions for this sport. But more of these people, more of the Ramogi Humas, more of the Nick Sabans, more of the, I'm sure there are a million names that I'm leaving out that are doing remarkable things like Huma is doing. More of those people in the room, the better. Because a lot of the conversation around college football in the last little bit, especially, but college sports overall, has been, you got to put power in the hands of the players, and that's more than fine. There's no question that I think players deserve more power, more say in what happens in college football and college sports going forward. The reality is, throwing power into their hands without the ability or the knowledge to handle it effectively does no one any good. It doesn't do any good to the players. It actually really hurts the players, and it hurts the sport overall. So it's not necessarily about throwing power into these kids' hands. It's about giving them the power that not only they can use, but they can use correctly, and they can use effectively and with knowledge, and not make the mistakes that some of their predecessors have. So there's no one that understands that better than Ramogi Huma. There's no one that understands that better than Nick Saban. There's no one that understands that better than some of the former players that have gone through the NIL era and are now off the other side and realizing maybe that wasn't the greatest thing in the world. So all of this to say, college football, college sports is looking for a voice, and not just, one singular one, although if I had to pick a guy, Ramogi Huma would be very, very high on that list just because of the person that he is. But there's so many people out in college sports that want to do good and are trying their darndest to do really, really good every single day and are making big time strides. Don't get me wrong, but they've got to be even bigger part of this conversation, maybe the biggest part of this conversation, because the health for the players is health for every single sport across college football and college sports. So it's going to be fun to watch this kind of unfold. It'll be interesting to see if the same people that have been running the show for quite some time continue to run the show, but I really hope that's not the case. I really hope that people like Ramogi Huma can get in that door and can really kick it down, to be totally honest with you. Not to say that he needs to be out there saving college sports on his own by any means, but he is a step in the right direction. And at this point, I will take any step in the right direction that I can get. This is one of those guys that you might not know the name now, but in 2 or 3 years, I'd be shocked if there weren't a lot of people that knew this name and a lot of people that, admired this person, not for what he does just for the athletes, but just who he is on a daily basis. So I've read about him just a little bit, and I am very glowing about this guy. I'm sure we will hear more about him going down the road, and hopefully we will see him in a position of a little bit of power down the road. But we'll find out what happens with that as it comes. We'll see if he makes that jump. I very much hope he does, but that'll do it for that. For talking about Ramogi Huma for the time being. We'll definitely get back to him later on. But we'll talk about Oklahoma and the SEC. There's a big time question mark around, can Oklahoma and Texas handle what the SEC has to offer from physicality and a scheduling standpoint? Well, we're going to get into that, at least for Oklahoma this next segment. So stick with us, and we will be right back with that.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about Ramogi Huma, who is a big-time activist in college sports around athlete activism, making sure that athletes have the proper rights and the proper ability to handle those rights that they are given. So a very big name that you will hear a lot more of as the offseason goes on, but also as the next couple of years go on, because he's a pretty remarkable individual. But let's get into some football. Let's talk about Oklahoma, and let's talk about if they are ready for the SEC. This is a big-time question mark as we go into this new era of conference realignment. Are these new schools ready for what's waiting for them in their new conference? People are worried about, can Texas handle the schedule that is ahead of them in the SEC, although it's a lot nicer than Oklahoma's, which we'll get to here in a second. People are wondering if USC can handle the physicality that's coming for them in the Big Ten. So big-time questions across the board. But let's start with Oklahoma, and let's talk about the Sooners and see kind of where they're rolling going into 2024. So Oklahoma feels like a bigger question between the two when you're talking about Oklahoma or Texas, right? You look at the Texas roster, it's pretty sweet, pretty much top to bottom. There's a couple of holes here and there that you'll have to worry about. We'll likely get into Texas in their own segment, but Oklahoma feels like the bigger question mark. I think we can all agree on that, and it's because there's a couple of big-time things that are just not quite where you'd want them to be, and mainly the offensive and defensive line, and those could really hurt you, especially in the SEC. Things get a little bit more physical, and when they get more physical, the trenches become that much more important. So it'll be fascinating to see if they can, put together a really good offensive line, a really good D-line, and, handle that, or is that going to be the reason that they lose a couple of games? Because from where I'm standing, there's not a lot else that is wrong about this team or about this program. So when you look across pretty much the rest of their roster, leave out offensive line, leave out defensive line. I know that's a big-time caveat to throw in there, but just for a second. You have guys on the back end like Peyton Bowen you just saw. You have tons of talent. Ethan Downs as an edge rusher. You have Danny Stutzman coming back as a linebacker. There's ability across this defense. Also on offense, you have one of the best wide receiver cores in the entire country. There's no question about that. You have a running back in Gavin Sawchuk that I expect to take a big step forward. And then you have that guy right there, Jackson Arnold, who is, I expect to take a big step forward. Obviously, the O-line has a ton to do with what happens there, but the reality is I expect him to be a much better player this upcoming year. I think this team has a lot of stuff in place. The big time issue with that is the roster can be great. The coaching can be great. The strength and conditioning can be great. The NIL can be great. All of that stuff can be in place. If they're not elite, you're going to have a tough time really competing in the SEC. And I understand that it's all splitting hairs, and there's not necessarily some things that Oklahoma can't do in that, realm of things. They absolutely have the ability to have elite across the board. But right now, they might just be a step behind everyone else. And that's not to say it's, not an easy gap to kind of close, because they can absolutely do that fairly quickly. But when you look at the SEC every single year, when you look across the teams that are dominating, every year there is a very, very good team that just gets railroaded. And it's because they're in the SEC, it's because they have a tough schedule, it's because they have some glaring holes that really get exploited in the SEC. For whatever reason, there are moments where it just looks bad for some of these teams. We saw it with some teams a year ago where it felt like they had a really, really good team, but just things didn't fall into order. This year, I kind of expect the same thing to happen with Florida, because there's a lot of really good things to like about Florida, but when you look at that schedule, it's an absolute nightmare. So they could be a 7-5 team and be a very, very good team, but that's the reality of the SEC. And the question is, for Oklahoma, are they going to be one of those teams? When you face teams like Tennessee, Texas, Ole Miss, Missouri, Bama, LSU, all in the same year, there's a little bit of worry. There's no two ways about that. And it's a little bit of a mean thing to do to the Sooners coming into the SEC, but that's the reality. When you've dominated the Big 12 for as long as Oklahoma has, you're going to walk in with a little bit of tougher schedule. And the biggest question to me isn't necessarily what this program has for the future. I think as of right this second, there are a lot of things in place for them to be a player in the SEC going forward. 2024 is a little bit more sketchy, and the problem with that is, let's just say, hypothetically, Oklahoma goes 7-5. What happens to 2025 and 2026 and 7? Because as we know in the SEC, 1 year can really hurt you, because recruiting margins are razor thin, transfer portal margins are razor thin. A lot of this stuff is so close, and if Oklahoma goes 7-5 while Missouri goes 9-3 and Ole Miss goes 9-3 and another team, Tennessee goes 9-3, whoever it is, if all of that happens, Oklahoma's going to have a tough time recruiting against those guys. And then they'll have a tough time getting maybe some coaches leave for those places. So the reality is the SEC is a game that is a absolute tightrope walk. And it's a little bit less so for some teams. The Georgias of the world have their ducks absolutely in a row. There is no question that Georgia has elite ability on their roster, one of the best coaching staffs in the entire country. NIL is off the charts. Transfer portal, they know what they're doing. Recruiting, they're the best in the country. So Georgia is the only one in the SEC in my mind that could not fall off a cliff in the next little bit. But the reality is the SEC is not too kind to teams that leave a little bit on the table, even in 1 year. So it could be that if 2024, if they stumble out of the gate and look like not necessarily the Oklahoma they could look like, it doesn't necessarily stop affecting you after the 2024 season. It could affect you down the road, even 3 or 4 years down the road, depending on how the season goes. Now, all of that being said, I think there's a lot of good things in place this year. I talked about it earlier. I think that O-line is a little bit of a worry, but Bill Bedenbaugh is a fantastic coach there, and I think he's someone that can at least make this team solid at that position, which is really all you can ask for at this point. The D-line, they're still trying to pull in some guys from the transfer portal, and we'll get into that a little bit later, but I think it's one of those things where neither of those positions are going to be fantastic. I can feel very confident in saying that. I think the O-line is going to be fine. I think the interior defensive line is going to be a little shaky, but I think they'll be okay. The reality is you just cannot bottom out, because when you look at this program right now, the recruiting infrastructure is great. I think Brent Venables is turning this program into something that they need to be if they're going to compete in the SEC, which is just physical, tough, angry, all of those great things that the all SEC teams are, at least if they're going to be successful in the SEC, that's what you are. So I fully understand that, and I fully think that Oklahoma is going to be fine, in the vein of, I like the way that this program is going right now. But as I said before, and as I've said probably a couple of times at this point, 1 year in the SEC where you don't meet the expectations that you had for yourself can torpedo the next 3. So let's say O-line and D-line are as big of an issue as they look like they could be on paper. This team could affect the program. I have full faith in what this program is right now. I don't have quite as much faith in this team. And the problem is those are very much tied together. And with a conference that are razor thin margins and a million teams that you're going to have to compete against, because when you looked around the Big 12 and what Oklahoma and Texas were really up against, it was, Oklahoma State, it was Kansas State, it was some other teams from time to time that would pop into that conversation. But recruiting wise, it wasn't much of a problem. Transfer portal wise, they swung the biggest stick and they knew that. The SEC, that's not the case. Everything is razor thin margins. There's teams like Tennessee, like Missouri, like Ole Miss that are making their way up. And if Oklahoma comes out of the gate and falls on their face in 2024, they might just become a team that is not able to get up off their face until about 2027. So that's just the reality of the SEC. That's the world that you're stepping into. I think Oklahoma's going to be okay. I think they'll be able to do enough this year to where the future in the SEC will be more than fine for them, and they'll be able to kind of handle that as it comes. But there is that reality. There is that, chance that in a conference that is so tough to compete in, if you stumble out of the gate, it might be really, really hard to make up that ground in the future. So it'll be fascinating to watch this team kind of unfold. It's a very talented team at pretty much every position across the field. So I have a lot of faith in them to kind of pull it off. I have a lot of faith in Brent Venables to do what he needs to do to make it happen. But Oklahoma's in one of the weirdest positions in the entire country. It is a huge year for them, not only to, not to say that they have to, compete in the SEC or do anything crazy, but just keep your head above water. Win 8 or 9 games, show everyone that you belong, and then, work from there and continue this build that has been happening under Brent Venables, and I think will continue to happen. It's just there's that big question mark that if the O-line and the D-line are what they look like on paper, things could get a little bit sketchy around Norman for the next couple of years. But we'll find out what will happen there as the season comes. It'll be fascinating to see if Oklahoma is ready. We won't really know until, boots are laced up and they're ready to go. But at the end of the day, I think this team is in a good spot, at least a relatively good spot right now. But that'll do it for that section of this show. We'll break down the transfer portal when we come back. A couple of big-time names have come off the board. Not a ton of intel left to give you, but definitely some big-time commitments, especially from Michigan and Ole Miss, that have some very interesting things developing in their rosters right now. So we'll break all that down right after this, so stick with us.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about if Oklahoma was ready for the SEC, It's going to be a little bit of a tightrope walk, but I like where Brent Venables and Oklahoma is at going into the future. But let's start to break down the transfer portal. And it's about 3 weeks since this thing is closed, but there are still some names out there that are just hanging around, that are waiting to make their decision. That being said, we had a big-time weekend for commitments. We had some big-time players come off the board, some players that, I'll be totally honest, I did not know the name of, but I absolutely should have, because there are some big-time guys out there that were picked up this weekend. And let's start with Michigan. They entirely rebuilt that defensive backfield. I don't know what has happened throughout that spring. I thought they were in a relatively good position. Obviously, losing Rod Moore does not help that by any means, but I didn't think they were going to do what they did this weekend, which is add 4 DBs to their roster from the transfer portal. It starts with Amir Hall, an FCS All-American from Albany a year ago, a very, very talented kid, 5 interceptions. And when you put him across from Will Johnson, one of the best corners in the entire country, you probably have a good amount of success. As you remember, Albany is where Jared Verse came from before he went over to Florida State. So there's no question that some of those guys can compete at a very high level right away. So very excited to see what Amir Hall can do. Wesley Walker is a guy that we talked about in relation to LSU last week. Well, he's committed to Michigan. I don't know where that happened. They came out of the clouds to grab him up, but this is an absolute vet. He has played a very, very long time and a very big pickup for them, especially with Rod Moore going down with an injury. You need that leadership at the safety position, and this might just be the guy to do it. Then you add someone like Jaden Mangum, who might be right up there with him in terms of vet leadership. He was a second-team All-Big Ten safety a year ago at Michigan State, and icing on top of the cake from taking him from one of your rivals is you stole him from one of your rivals in Ohio State. Nebraska was also in on this kid, so a huge pickup for Michigan there. Both those safeties are going to be big-time players, but why not add another one, right? They added Ricky Johnson, a safety from UNLV, a very talented guy, had 7 pass breakups a year ago, and has played a lot of really good football in his past. And with, the the development ability and the ability within that room at Michigan, I think he's going to be even better player for them. But add that to Will Johnson, J.D. McBurrows, J.R. Hill. It's going to be a mean group. There's no two ways about that. This Michigan defense is going to be one of the best in the country, as we have become very accustomed to over the last little bit. And then we had another very interesting thing happen over the weekend, which is Ole Miss's running back room became the most crowded thing in the entire world. I don't know what the plan is, but as of right now, they're all over the place. Obviously, you had Quinshon Judkins leave, and there were some Ole Miss fans that were a little bit worried about how they would replace him and how they would get that production back. Well, they're bringing in 4 guys to do it, so I think they'll be more than fine there. You do get Ulysses Bentley back, who I think will be the starter there, but added Logan Diggs in the winter portal from LSU, added Henry Parrish from Miami in the spring portal, and you thought they were done there. They were not. For whatever reason, they were not. Rashad Amos is a guy that took a nice little vacation around the country over the last couple of weeks. He left Miami of Ohio, was a fantastic player there. Committed to Mississippi State after about 2 weeks there. He decided to decommit and commit to Colorado. After about a week there, he decided to decommit and commit to Ole Miss. So a little bit of buyer's beware on that one, I will say that, but definitely a very talented player, and if he can set his feet and stick around in Ole Miss for a minute, I think he'll be more than talented for them. And then you added one more guy, Dominic Thomas, a very talented running back out of Georgia State. I think this is one that he'll likely sit until there's more room opening up in that room, and he'll probably hit the ground running in 2025. But the snap allocation for this year at the running back position is going to be nothing short of a nightmare for Lane Kiffin. I'll be totally honest. I don't know how you get all these guys the carries that they want. I don't know how you even remotely get close to getting these guys the carries that they want. I think Ulysses Bentley is the best running back in the room. I think it's by a relatively comfortable margin. So I think he'll be the guy, but it could just be all of them get 5 carries a game and you do some weird ways. But Lane Kiffin has something rolling around in his head, and far be it from me to tell him that he's wrong, that's for sure. But a couple other commitments that happened over the weekend. We had a couple of wide receivers come off the board, the two biggest guys. Michael Harrison Pilot is a very, very talented speedster out of Houston. He is committed to Texas Tech, a huge pickup for Texas Tech. That wide receiver group just keeps getting better and better. You add him to Micah Hudson. They had a guy come over from Washington State that I'm blanking on the name right now. I don't know why. But a very talented group nonetheless. Caleb Douglas, a guy that came over from Florida, is another one there. But a very, very talented group that Josh Kelly is the wide receiver from Washington State. My apologies. But another wide receiver that came off the board was Elijah Badger, the Arizona State product. He is committed to Florida. This is one we fully expected, but adding him to the Trey Wilsons of the world is going to be a mean duo. There's no two ways about that. It's another thing that makes me feel a little bit interested in Florida. I'm not necessarily betting on anything with them, but I don't know, man. There's something happening in Gainesville. I'll say that. Andrew Paul is a running back from Georgia that you might have seen during the spring game. Had a great game that day. Entered the portal and has committed to Jacksonville State. That is not at all where I thought he would end up. I thought it would be a Power 5 program, to be totally honest with you, but he's going to light the world on fire. He might be the story when we talk about smaller schools in the upcoming year. He might just do incredible things at Jacksonville State. So very excited about that. Caden Proctor has officially enrolled back in Alabama. So not really news there. We all knew that was going to happen, but finally is in writing and he is back on campus. A weird spring for him for sure, but definitely back where he probably should be in Tuscaloosa. And then you go to Michigan State. They added a couple of big-time cornerback commits in Nakai Martinez from UCF and Jeremiah Hughes from LSU. They also got Samaje Bridgman from a linebacker from Michigan. This might not be a starter this year, but definitely could be a star for them in the future. Washington added a big-time DB, and Cameron Broussard from Sacramento State was an All-Big Sky player a year ago. Probably will start for them this upcoming year, as they're going to need a couple of guys on that back end, that's for sure. The D-line got another guy off the board in Brandon Lane from Stephen F. Austin, a very talented kid, was committed to Michigan State, decommitted, is now committed to Louisville. So a very talented kid, and Jeff Brom absolutely needed him with Jermaine Lole walking out the door. But let's get into some other guys that are still on the board, and to be totally honest, there's not a ton to break down in terms of where these guys are going. A lot of the stuff that I've said in the past still holds true. Oklahoma is still looking for an interior defensive lineman to replace Jermaine Lole after he decommitted and went to Texas. They're looking at Aiden Huntington, the ULM transfer. They're looking at Chris Hardy, a Jacksonville State transfer. Both very talented kids, and OU needs to land one of them. I'll say that very confidently, because the reality is Dominic Williams is going to be one of their starters. Whoever they pick up in these next, little bit will likely be the second starter in that interior defensive line. So it'll be interesting to watch that. Tyler Barron is as confusing as ever. LSU just entered the conversation with USC and Miami, so not super sure where he'll end up. I'm leaning Miami, but that's just kind of a gut feeling more than anything else. Kobe Minor's a very talented safety out of Indiana that we thought the commitment was done, but sounds like it's not. He's bouncing around a little bit. I think he was at Michigan State recently. So this is a very talented kid that absolutely will be a game changer for someone. Khalil Jacobs is someone we've talked about a little bit, is bouncing around some SEC schools right now, was at Ole Miss most recently, and definitely would be a big-time player for them. So there's still players on the board that absolutely will have a big-time effect on their team that might just be starters for their team wherever they end up playing. But the reality is, I'm a little bit sick of talking about this transfer portal cycle. I'll be totally honest. This is likely the last full update that we'll do, and we'll kind of sprinkle in some different things on some shorts on YouTube or just in the show, letting you know where these guys end up, because there are some big-time players there, but no need to kind of break this down any further. All these guys are kind of kicking around the same type of schools that they've been for the last couple of weeks. So we'll wait on decisions, obviously, and fill you in as they come, but probably the last time we'll do a big-time transfer portal, big board types segment on here. But a crazy cycle, definitely one that I expected to be just a little bit crazier, I'll be totally honest with you. But at the end of the day, it was off the walls. There were tons of big-time players that went around that are going to be huge for their teams. Damian Martinez probably at the top of that list. Simeon Barrow Jr. down at Miami as well. You had Derek Harmon up at Oregon. You have tons of really good players. Javion Cole over at Texas. A lot of really, really talented players that came off the board that will play big-time parts on their team. So that spring portal that used to be kind of just a formality and just guys leaving that really wouldn't have that big of an effect or just not that big of a story turned out to be a big-time story this time around. So it'll be interesting to see if that continues into next year, but we'll figure that out as it comes, obviously. But we're going to take our last break here. When we come back, we're going to talk about a Top 10 Tuesday, and we're going to go back to College Football 25. It is really all that I want to talk about right now, if I'm being totally honest. Cannot be more excited about this game, but I'm going to give you my top 10 players that I am most excited to play with in this upcoming game, whether that's a quarterback that I'm excited to make wild plays with, a defender. I tried to get a couple of defenders in there, although, we're all excited about playing offense. There's no two ways about that, but tried to include some defenders in there, and it's an interesting list, but I like it a lot. So definitely stick around, and we'll be right back with that. Welcome back, everyone. We just talked about the transfer portal, gave an update on where everything is going in that spring transfer portal. Likely the last one that we'll do there, just to start moving on to some football. I feel like we've been talking about the portal a little bit too much, honestly. But let's start to break down some big-time players in the College Football 25 game. I think all of us are looking forward to that game, but specifically playing with some individual players. Maybe they're your favorite player on your favorite team, but maybe there's just a guy across the country that you think is absolutely electric that you're excited to play with. Well, I have my own list, and it's a little bit interesting. There's definitely some players on here that maybe you didn't expect to be on here, or maybe you're a little bit more off the beaten path, but it starts with Aiden Childs for me. I cannot be more excited to play with this kid. If there's an Aiden Childs fan club anywhere on Twitter or Instagram, or they can meet in person, I don't care. Just let me know where they're at, and I will absolutely be joining, because this kid has juice. I absolutely loved watching him at Oregon State a year ago. He can make things happen out of thin air. He does incredible things with his legs. Obviously, that is going to be the big-time seller for him at Michigan State. There's going to be a time or two in this college football season, in the real college football season, where he's going to make incredible plays. He's going to evade rushers. He's going to run all over the place, break some tackles, score a ridiculous touchdown, and everyone's going to say, that's insane. Or everyone's going to say, that only happens in a video game. Well, it happens in real life. This dude is absolutely off the charts talented, and cannot wait to get my hands on the sticks with this kid, because I don't know if there's a D lineman, linebacker, DB, it doesn't matter. I don't know if there's anyone that can run down this kid in real time. So it'll be fascinating to play with him. Avery Johnson is another guy kind of in the same way. I love quarterbacks that have that running ability. As you can see, I love specific quarterbacks. I was a big-time Justin Fields guy when he was coming out, and that didn't necessarily work out the way that I was hoping. But Avery Johnson is one of those guys that I just cannot wait to get my hands on in this game. I think he's someone that, especially with that offense that they run, and a guy that is a little bit further down on this list with Dylan Edwards, running read option after read option and zone read after zone read and doing so many different things is just going to be insanely fun. I could go through an entire game with Kansas State only running rushing plays and enjoy myself to the nth degree. I think it'd just be incredible. So very excited with that one. And then comes the obvious one, Travis Hunter. This is one that is an absolute layup. When you can play a full game as one specific player, it's a special thing. This is a guy that plays 134 snaps a game, has no problem, comes up to the podium after and says he'll play another game. This dude is absolutely remarkable, and him in a video game, I don't know how you contextualize that, to be totally honest with you. They say they're going to have wear and tear as a part of the game where guys get a little bit more worn down as the hits start to pile up. I don't know how you do that with Travis Hunter because it doesn't seem like it happens in real life. I don't know how his body works. He's obviously some type of superhuman, but the reality is I don't know if you can include wear and tear for him because it seems like his body doesn't have wear and tear, but it's going to be fascinating to play with him. Cannot wait for that. And then you have Ollie Gordon, probably going to be the highest rated running back in this game, or at least should be. If he's not, then I got a little bit of a problem with that. But I think he's going to be incredibly fun to play with, and not only because of who he is on the football field, but also the O-line you're going to be running behind is going to be one of the best in the game. There's no two ways about that. They're incredible across that line, and you'll find it's really, really fun to play running back when those big-time holes open up and you can get racing down the field with Ollie Gordon. So definitely someone I'm very much looking forward to. There are a number of running backs in this game that I'm looking forward to, but Ollie Gordon might be at the top of the list because of that mix of power and speed and that offensive line that will make life a little bit easier for me, not going to lie. Then we get to the defensive side of the ball. Let's talk about Abdul Carter because I love me a good edge rusher, especially in one of those video games where you can beat that tackle off the edge and make a user sack. That's always a very, very fun thing. I think this dude is more than an edge rusher, though. I'm going to use him, obviously, to sack the quarterback, but the reality is when I have a guy that can drop back in coverage, that can cover sideline to sideline, that can just play outright middle linebacker if you need him to, you got to love that kid. So he's someone that if I'm playing as Penn State and I'm on the defensive side of the ball, no one else is being controlled by me. There's no question about that. I am Abdul Carter down after down after down, and wear and tear can, I'll figure that out on the back end. That's just the reality. I think this guy is going to be incredible on the virtual fields, but also the literal field this upcoming year. I think he could put up just ridiculous numbers, and we'd be looking at him wondering why he was not the going favorite as the top defender off the board in this upcoming draft. But that will come as, time goes on. But let's get to the back half of this list, and another Kansas State guy on this list is Dylan Edwards. One of the most electric playmakers in the entire country. He can run the ball. He can catch the ball. He returns kicks. He can do literally anything you want him to do on a football field. And when you have that type of speed, it gets really fun to play with him. He is a get the ball in his hands type of player and then just watch him fly. He's so much fun to watch. You could literally just build your entire offense around him individually, and you'd have a pretty darn good offense. There's no two ways about that. So very, very excited to play with him. Kansas State, as you can see, is going to be a team I get my hands on quite a bit in this game. And then you have Silas Bolden, maybe one that you were not expecting to be on this list, but when we talk about kids that are just get the ball in his hands and watch him fly, he might be the very top of the list. This kid can do things with the ball in his hands that are just out of this world. And every now and then throughout the season, and you'll hear someone say that Steve Sarkisian's got a couple of tricks up his sleeve. Well, this is the trick up his sleeve. It's just get the ball out to Silas Bolden and watch him fly. So very excited to use him, not only because of what he brings, but also that playbook with him at the central of it is going to be a thing of beauty. And then we get back to the defensive side of the ball. Harold Perkins is going to be so much fun to play with. The same way Abdul Carter is going to be the only player I control for Penn State, Harold Perkins is going to be the only player I control for LSU on the defensive side of the ball. And part of that is because there's not a lot of us other guys that I'd like to control, but also Harold Perkins is just remarkable. He can do anything on the football field that you need him to do. His ceiling, in my eyes, is as high as anyone in the country, barring position. And I think with him in this video game, I think The speed number is going to be off the charts, especially when you talk about a linebacker. He's going to be able to make every single play you want him to make, so I would not be shocked if Harold Perkins ended up being a guy that people really sunk their teeth into and maybe set up an entire road to glory around a linebacker named Harold Perkins, because it would be really, really fun. I think he's someone that you don't necessarily love playing defense in these games. I fully understand that, but he's going to make it more fun than anything else. And then you had Luther Burden, a wide receiver from Missouri. This one's clear. When you have a top wide receiver in the country, he's always going to be fun to play with. When you're a quarterback and you're throwing up balls, and you always want to throw that deep ball, right? You always want to throw the fades. You always want to throw the 50-50 toss-up type plays. Luther Burden's going to catch like 90 of them. He's more of a 90-10 guy than a 50-50 guy, as we've all talked about. So he's going to be incredible to watch. I think I'll throw fade after fade to this kid and just watch him make play after play. So I cannot wait to play with Missouri, play with this kid, and just watch him do crazy stuff on the video game, knowing that he does that crazy stuff on the football field as well. And then finally, Jalen Milroe. This is another one that feels a little bit of a layup. I'd be very surprised if he was anywhere under a 94, 95 in this upcoming game, because this kid is special. I know there are a lot of people that like to poke holes in his game and say, he's not an NFL quarterback. Well, he's not yet. He has every ability to make those strides this upcoming year, and obviously his legs are what make him special. There's no two ways about that, and I'm going to enjoy that very thoroughly when playing this game. But I got to be honest, the thing I'm most excited about is just unload a ball with this kid. His arm strength is going to be one of the best in the entire game, and he throws a deep ball as good as anyone in the entire country. So maybe the first play of the game when I'm playing with Alabama is just going to be letting one rip to Kendrick Law down the middle of the field. So I cannot wait to play with Jalen Milroe. I think he's one of those guys that not only gives you the fun of a read option type offense, but also every now and then you can just take the top off and throw it all the way down the field, and it'll be a really, really fun time. There's no two ways about that. For honorable mentions, everyone else. Literally everyone else. I don't care the player, the team, the name. It doesn't matter. This game is going to be incredible. I'm going to try to play as every single team in this game at some point while I have it, but I just cannot wait. I genuinely cannot wait for this game. We're a little bit less than 2 months away at this point, and you can almost taste it, right? But we'll do more content around this game. We'll talk about, what the highest rated players might be, who the highest rated teams might be, who I'm going to pick for my dynasty, where I'm kind of battling between Buffalo, UNLV, some other small teams that are bouncing around, and my Texas State is another one. So if you guys want to help me out with that, leave your suggestions in the comments. But that'll do it for this edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. Your support means a lot to us, so please remember to subscribe to the show, leave a positive review. It does make a huge difference for us. Also, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, all of the social pages for all of the content and updates you could possibly need. We have incredible people doing work from soccer to basketball to baseball to women's sports to wrestling to golf to hockey. I could go on and on. It's incredible what these guys do, and if you need anything in the world of sports, come on over to GSMC and we have you more than covered. But thank you once again for listening, and I will see you guys tomorrow.
Let's go.